Hi and welcome. This is a short demo of a Firebase Lightning Connector. The purpose of this connector is to make life just a lot easier for developers as they integrate with Firebase real-time database. So what I'm going to do here is I've got Visual Studio for Mac open. I'm going to create a new application. I'm doing everything from scratch, just from the bottom up, just to show how easy it is to use the plugin. So I'm going to make a console application pretty simple. I'm going to use .NET Core version 8. And let me see, I'll just say delete me please. So I can remember to delete this application because I won't really need it. Let me just put this in my downloads folder, pretty easy. And let's see, this is probably too big. Let me just shrink that text a little bit so that you can see a little bit more of the text. And I'm going to change this around a little bit. And this is normally what we see in a console application. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to show you how to initiate CRUD operations using the plugin. CRUD, most developers will understand what CRUD is, but CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete, which are your basic database operations that you need to accomplish when you're creating an application. So what I've done is I've created a couple of code snippets so I could just drag them onto my canvas here, and you won't have to waste time watching me type a lot of stuff. Over here I have a Firebase interface. I'm going to create a new Firebase application, and I'm also going to call this Delete Me Please. And my plan is, as soon as I'm done with this video, to delete this database. So if your plan was to screenshot anything that I'm doing here and then use this database, you should probably make a different plan because this database is going to be deleted in just a couple of minutes. So the purpose of this video is not to teach you how to use Firebase, but when you do create a Firebase real-time database or a Firebase project, you go into your Firebase admin. Google can create one of these for you for free, and you can start using it. It's pretty slick stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a real-time database. And I'll create the database. So because I'm creating it from scratch, you'll know it's going to be totally empty. And I've increased the resolution, or decreased the resolution on my screen, so I actually can't see. Oh, there we go. The action buttons. I'm going to start in test mode. Default security, blah, 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 blah. So it's just telling me that's dangerous. So I'm starting in test mode so that I can read and write to and from the database. So I've enabled my database. I'm going to check the read and write rules. Okay, that's going to work. So I've got a real-time database. It's brand new. I've got a console application that's brand new. What I'm going to do in my console application is let's go to the solution view, and I'm going to add a NuGet package. And in the NuGet package manager, I'll search for Firebase Lightning Connector, and I'll add that package. Compatibility looks good. It's still adding it. And I will accept all of this. Okay, good. We're good to start. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a using statement. This will be majorwebs.firebase.lightning. And I'll add a try catch block. Just in case we do run into errors, we can see what the errors are. All right, so if we do have errors, it should write it out here to our console. All right, so for CRUD, first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create some data in our database. So here's one of my code snippets. And I'll just explain what I'm doing here a little bit. So I've got a random number generator. I pass it a seed value and it gives me a random number between 0 and the seed value. I'm using that because I've got a string array of first names, a string array of last names here. And I'm going to create a series of employee objects and put them in our database. So right here you can see I'm trying to create a new employee object, but it doesn't actually exist yet. So let me add that. And you can see here's the properties of my employee object. It has an integer ID and also has a string key. When using the Firebase Lightning Connector, I suggest that your models include a key value. So I'll add this property to any model that I'm going to keep in this real-time database, because Firebase assigns a unique identifier to each object in the database. Each document is what it's called. And that unique identifier is its key. And so I like actually having the key as part of the model. It makes it a lot easier to search on and a lot easier to get a specific model when you do have the key. Also, other properties here. For an employee, clearly you're going to have a first name, last name, we have a created date, and whether or not the employee is inactive and active or inactive. I set some defaults here. Here's the created date default, and everything defaults to true as being active. I also have an override string method, and that way I can just call the object to see its ID and the full name of the employee. So that's my employee object, and you can see that I've lost the error that was here. It's seeing the employee now. I can also see I have a couple other areas here indicated by these red squiggly lines. So these are awaiters, which means that this method, this main method, needs to be an async task. So when I do that, I can see that my error disappears, or the await error disappears. I also need a database object. So I need to refer to the database, so I need my connection string. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and create a connection string. Database equals new Lightning Connector. And then I go over here to my real-time database and I simply grab this URL. This is the URL to the new database that I created. And I use this simple tool to just copy it to my clipboard, and then I can just paste it right on in here. All right. So now I have my database reference. I've got a random value generator. I've got an array of first names and last names. And when I create a new model employee, I'm going to create about 49 of them. So from 1 to up to 50. I'm generating a number, and I kind of write that out to the console, And then I set that as the ID of the employee, and I go into the first name array and I get a random number between 1 and 17, which is the number of names in the array. And do the same thing for the last name. Set those, and then I simply save that to my database. And so as we run this, we'll see records appearing here in our console right down below here. We'll also see the records appearing in our database. So let's just think that should do it. Okay, I can see it populating the database in real time. And it'll make 49 records for me. Great. So that's a sample of creating records. Now I'm just going to go in and let me just delete this create method because I don't need it any longer. So I'm kind of collapsing all of those, and I'm just deleting the create junk right there. So let's go ahead and read this data. So I'll read a list of data. So what I'm doing here is I get all the items in that are items of type employee from the database, find out how many got returned to me, and I write that out to the console. And then for each record that gets returned, I'm writing out the name of the person, or the fictitious name that we've created. So let's go ahead and run that. We can see we've got 49 records total, and here are all the names. So that's reading a series of records. Let me just comment this out. And I'm going to show you how to read a single record, or one of the ways to read a single record. I'll read an item. And here's what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a variable called employee. And I'm going into my database and getting an employee object whose ID is equal to 5. When I do that, then I'm just going to write out to the console the employee name and ID. So let's go ahead and run that. And I get an error. Error here is index is not defined. So if you've used real-time database in the past, you know that in order to do a search on the real-time database, you actually have to index the columns in the database, or the properties of the documents. I'm so used to SQL type of data that I call it columns, and it's not really columns. Each one of these is a document, and these are properties in the document. So in my rules tab, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to set up some indexes. And my mouse got stuck, sorry. So what I'm doing is I'm saying in the employee table, I'm going to index on key, ID, title. Actually, I don't think there's a title, so I'm going to use last name here. And I'll publish that. And then I'll come back to my data, take a look at record number 5, which is the record I'm looking for here. And let's run it again. All right, it tells me number 5 is Aspen Jones, and I can see that's the first name, Aspen, and the last name is Jones. And even if I change this in the database itself, of course, it's going to be reflected if I run this again. Now I see Aspen Jonesy. Okay, all well and good, pretty easy. Let me get rid of this code, and I'm going to uncomment this code of reading a list here. What I want to do is, how do I get a list where and find out all the employees whose last name is Jones? So I made an index on the last name column or the last name property. So what I can do is I can search that. So if I search by last name and I tell it I'm looking for the Joneses, let me change this back actually so I know I have at least one record. So instead of bringing back all the data in the table and then doing a filter on the client or in the application, I could just filter it in my query, which is pretty typical operation that we want to do. So then we go into the database, take a look for how many records there are. There's 4 whose last name is Jones, is record 5, 18, 27, and 40. So real easy way to filter your records. Let me go ahead and delete this right here. And let's update a record. So here's what I'm doing is creating a variable called model. I go and I get that let me get the record or the document that has ID of 5, and I'm going to change the name to Melchizedek, and then I'll just use save item. So in the Firebase Lightning Connector, there's not a different method for saving or updating. The software is smart enough to know whether you're saving or you're updating. So you just call one method, you get your object, you hit save, and if it's new, it'll insert a record. If it already exists, it'll update the record. So let's go ahead and run this, and I'll take a look at this first name field here. I didn't get an error, and something's not happening right here. So I don't need an index on the first name field in order to update it, because I'm just searching by the ID field. That's where I need the index, and I already have it. So let me try running that again. Unable to connect. Did I change this? Does it have uncommitted changes? No, it doesn't. I'm going to cancel that. Unable to. Let's try record number 6 just for kicks. So we got ID 6 here. Change this and we'll run it again. Okay, and we see that the first name changed. That was a queer error that I saw there. So that's updating a record, pretty simple. So we've done our create, we've done our read, and we've done our update. Let's go ahead and do a delete. So what I'm doing here is I'm going from record number 50, which we already know there's only 49, so down to record number 31. And I'm going to delete each record there. And one of the ways I'm doing it is this. I grab this ID and I do a search for the record with that ID, and I'm actually pulling that record into my application. I don't have to do that, but I'll show you how I would do it. I would do the same thing without pulling the record into my application. because I'm not really using it, I'm going to delete this record. So I don't need to pull it into my application. Anyway, so I check to see if I actually get an employee object back. If I do, then I just I'm writing to the console saying which record I'm deleting, and then I use my database object and I just delete the object. Pretty easy. Let me go ahead and run that. And I'm going to scroll down here. You can see records that are being deleted here. So probably 29 records were deleted. So probably an easier way to do this and with less overhead on the client side would be to do it this way. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. So again, I'm using the ID property, and I'm just telling it I have an overload for the delete object async method. And the overload is I can pass in an employee object, or I can just tell it what kind of object I'm looking at so it knows which table to look at, and I'm telling it which column or which property I'm searching on and what the value of that property is. So I can use last name Jones here if I want to delete all the Joneses, or I can use ID for each one of these IDs. So now I'm going from record 30 down to record 10. I should have about 10 records left once this is done. So I'll run this. And again, we can see the objects just disappearing right in front of our eyes in real time. So I have 10 records left in my database. So that's it. That's a real simple down and dirty demo of the Firebase Lightning Connector. It makes it super, super easy to perform CRUD operations with your Firebase real-time database. I hope you enjoy it. Future plans. So this has been built in .NET Core version 8. It won't work with .NET Core 7 or 6, so we're going to have versions for 7 and 6 as well. And then we'll make a version for .NET Framework. And then after that, we'll do the same thing for SQL databases so that it makes it really, really easy to do CRUD operations with SQL databases. Thanks for your time.